welcome to tonight's virtual event with Brookline Booksmith, featuring the nominees for this year's Mary Higgins Clark Award. We're thrilled to play host to this incredible lineup. We have Paige Shelton, Mariah Fredericks, Elsa Hart, Rader-Day, and as both a nominee and a moderator, Phillippi Ryan. My name is Alex, and I'm the events director at Brookline Booksmith in Brookline, Mass. If you're familiar with our store, welcome back. It's great to have you, and we're happy that you can join us, if not in person, then online. If this is the first time you're even hearing about us, welcome. It's wonderful to have you join our community tonight. We appreciate your support of the authors and of an independent bookstore by turning out this evening, and for any purchases that you have made or are planning to make. As I said, the chat and the question box are both open, so feel free to make use of those. Remember, if you want to chat with your fellow attendees, set your chat to all panelists and attendees so everyone can see what you're saying. And if you have any questions for the authors, please only put those into the Q&A box at the bottom of your Zoom window so that they're collected and we can find them and read them out during the Q&A portion. Please note that Brookline Booksmith has a strict policy against abusive behavior and language, and at our discretion, any attendee can be immediately removed from an event for partaking in such behavior. Now, we rarely have more fun than we do with the right mystery crew, and tonight we're joined by some of the best of the bunch. The Mary Higgins Clark Award, established as part of the Edgars in 2001, celebrates exceptional works of suspense fiction, and tonight we hear from the best of the year. Phillippi Ryan, who will be moderating as well as celebrating, is nominated for The First to Lie. Hank is the USA Today bestselling author of 12 thrillers, winning 5 Agathas and the Mary Higgins Clark Award, and 37 Emmys for investigative reporting. Every time I have to read that number, I just boggle slightly at it. It's so big. The Murder List won the Anthony Award for Best Novel for 2019 and is an Agatha McCavity and Mary Higgins Clark Award nominee. Her newest psychological standalone, The First to Lie, garnered a Publishers Weekly starred review and is nominated for this year's award. Paige Shelton, nominated for Cold Wind, was born in Missouri but moved around a lot as a kid. One year she even lived in a haunted house. She and her family moved to Arizona 6 years ago. She has come to love the desert heat, which I've told is actually ideal weather that we can all be jealous of today, as well as all the plants and creatures in it that want to kill you for your water. Mariah Fredericks, nominated for Death of an American Beauty, was born and raised in New York City. She graduated from Vassar College with a degree in history. She enjoys reading and writing about dead people and how they got that way. She's the author of the Jane Prescott Mystery Series. Elsa Hart, nominated for the Cabinets of Barnaby, Maine, is the daughter of a journalist who was born in Rome and spent much of her childhood abroad, attending international schools in Moscow and Prague. She is drawn to stories about travelers throughout history and likes to put her characters in places that are unfamiliar to them. Rader-Day, nominated for The Lucky One, is the Edgar Award-nominated and Anthony and Mary Higgins Clark Award-winning author of The Lucky One, Under a Dark Sky, The Day I Died, Little Pretty Things, and The Black Hour. She co-chairs Murder and Mayhem in Chicago and is the immediate past president of Sisters in Crime. From 18th century London to small-town Alaska, from the lives of the privileged to the ladies' maids who work for them, from kidnapping to murder, from grief to greed, this year's nominees offer a broad and exciting range of what great suspense novels can be. It is a pleasure to have the authors all with us tonight. Please welcome the nominees for the 2021 Mary Higgins Clark Award.
Thank you, Alex. That is great. I loved that last line. Didn't you all? What was it? From grief to greed, from murder to mayhem to whatever. That's a good promotion. Thank you all for coming here tonight. It's just wonderful to see all of you nominees. Congratulations. And if I look over here like this means that I'm looking at the chat. It doesn't mean like I'm looking at my watch or something. I'm looking to see all the wonderful people who are here. So many friends from all across the country, and it's really heartwarming to see you all. Congratulations, you all. You have, this is quite an honor. And the idea, let me say first, how are you? Your book came out in a pandemic year. That was fun. How did you deal with that? Mariah, talk a little bit about how that affected you.
Oh, well, my book came out mid-April, so I think it was a month after everything really started shutting down. And actually people were really wonderful. People turned out in big numbers for this new weird virtual launch thing. that we all had to learn on the fly. And so it was a nice experience. I didn't think I would be doing it again this year, but at the time it was a lovely show of support.
Yeah, I mean, it's been interesting to connect with people this way. I know my launch for The First to Lie was in a pandemic and a thunderstorm with power outages all over Massachusetts. Paige, what was your launch like, and how did you deal with that?
Well, so far so good. My book published in December, and they actually had to put it off for a week. And I felt like at the time I'd been hearing about a lot of books were moved months down the road, and I was just grateful for just a week. It was the first time my publisher had run into any sort of issues as far as in their warehouse. So that was lucky. And I, like Mariah, it was amazing how lovely everybody's been on the online launches. I did some stuff with Poison Pen and Murder by the Book, and the support is extraordinary. So thank you to all the mystery readers. It was a crazy year, and we're still in a little crazy, but thanks for being there.
Yeah, I mean, I think it is a time to remember. You know, we look back and see how it used to be when we would all be getting boarding passes and, you know, making sure the hotel room service place was open. Elsa, this is your first mystery after your China books. What's it like to have been having sort of a debut mystery, although not a debut author, in a pandemic time?
Well, my book was one of the ones that was pushed several months. It was going to come out in the spring, and then instead came out in August. And I felt like my publisher, you know, looking out for me, that they were hoping at that point that the bookstores would be, you know, everything would be back to normal by August, which of course it wasn't. But so emotionally it was, those were a strange in so many ways, the months of the summer, but to have that, you know, anticipation and then this liminal period, and then to have it come out. But I also had the experience of people just being so awesome when it did, and readers being really responsive, and the virtual events having a lot of energy and a lot of excitement. So I feel grateful for that, and happy to be putting a story out this year for sure.
Yeah, I mean, it would have been really crazy, wouldn't it, Lori, without all the technical stuff and all the things that you do for other authors, the Murder and Mayhem in Chicago and Sisters in Crime, all those kinds of things. You also had to juggle with your launch. How was the launch part, at least?
I got a little lucky in that my book came out in February, so I was able to have about 10 events before it became clear that we were shutting down. I think the first thing to get canceled in the mystery world was Left Coast Crime, rest in peace, the one-day conference. But I canceled on that conference ahead of time, kind of seeing a little bit further ahead, because my conference, Murder and Mayhem in Chicago, was the following week. And it was, we had to cancel it. We were maybe the first to go virtual. Dana Kay, who I run the conference with, was all in. I was not. I was definitely like, no, I don't want to. I'm kick. You know, I just canceled everything in my entire life. But she actually turned it around, and we had 1,000 people come in that first weekend.
That was amazing. That was so well done. And it was one of the things that I also think that we'll remember about this time is it was a time that really everybody came together. And that was sort of the example of how this could work and how we could still be a community. I remember looking at my Outlook calendar on my phone, and it said, "You have no events."
Oh no.
You know, and I thought, oh, really, you know, this is not good. So let's talk about our books a little bit, because there are reasons that a book is a Mary Higgins Clark Award nominee, but instead, you know, our books are mysteries and thrillers and psychological suspense, and it's kind of hard to talk about that. So we came up with this scheme to tell about your book in 4 words, whether it's concept, motivation, character, theme. Who wants to start to do that? 4 words. Paige is looking like she wants to tell us. Yeah.
I'd be happy to start. I'd love to start. Okay, I think I played this right. I'm not sure, but let me know. So my 4 words are mudslide, frozen, hide, and primitive.
Mudslide, frozen,
Frozen,
hide,
Hyde and Primitive. If I could cheat a little, I would do a hyphen with Frozen and do Frozen hyphen body.
Oh, because I was thinking it's Frozen Mudslide, that drink that has, you know, brandy or whatever it is.
I hadn't thought about that, but there you go. So yeah.
I mean, that's interesting because it does tell us setting, and it does tell us conflict, and it does tell us action, and it does tell us sort of fear. What about you, Mariah? What are your four?
Oh, I did it so differently. Oh dear.
No, that's good. That's good. That's the point.
Mine was Maid Catches Killer in New York.
Oh,
You did a sentence. Maid Catches Killer in New York. We could call New York one word. But see, again, that very short essence of the book shows exactly what's going on. Lori, what about you?
Identities, high rise, that's a hyphenate,
Yeah.
oddballs, one word, and birds.
Birds. Oh, yeah.
And I wear my bird scarf. I have a scarf for every occasion. So
That's good. We'll have to do a whole show about that. And, you know, that shows you this sort of where we're going in this book, oddballs and high rise, and you see an identity. You can see a story kind of forming in that. Elsa, what about you?
I feel like I'm hearing poetry here. These like distilled to 4 words. Okay, mine are people die, collections don't.
oh,
I just got goosebumps hearing that. And that is, you know, it's so perfect for your book, which is so clever and so amazing. And it also shows how, you know, with the Mary Higgins Clark Award is supposed to, we think it's supposed to be, and how different the books really are in that framework. Mine are betrayal, motherhood, obsession, and revenge. And again, you get a completely different book, and you can see how different our books are. That's so fun. So let's do this again. Let's do another one. There was a thing on Facebook. I know Hank is playing games again. There's a thing on Facebook that said, describe your book in 5 phrases instead of sort of giving the elevator pitch. Talk about your book in 5 phrases. So let's hear about that. Starting with you, Elsa. I want to hear about the collections that don't die.
Okay. Five phrases: a cursed dagger, an old friendship, an elephant skull, a 300-year-old recipe for a hot cocktail, and several thousand tiny paper labels.
I mean, you can tell, I'm just going to show all the covers, but look at this incredible cover of the cabinet
cover.
I mean, is this backwards, you all? This doesn't matter. It's cool either way. This is so beautiful. And what Elsa has described is completely what's in this, which is so great. Which is so great. Paige, what about you?
All righty, let's see. Pardon me while I look down at my notes. This protagonist is a thriller writer. A fan stalker kidnaps her, but she escapes. In Cold Wind, a mudslide changes everything. There's an exposed, long frozen body and 2 little girls who are mysteries. Mother Nature in Alaska continues to be brutal.
See, and look at that. Cold Wind is exactly what Paige described. That's great. Okay, Mariah, how about you? I'm loving this. This is hard to do, isn't it? It's kind of hard to do, to get your book, the essence of your book in 5 phrases. Mariah, what about you?
Lady's Maid in 1913 New York. Uncle suspected of being a serial killer.
That's a problem.
The 50th anniversary of the Emancipation Proclamation. Department stores. Justice served and denied.
That is, and see, look at this. It is New York City in 1913, and a lady's maid as the main character. Such an evocative, historical, beautiful. Did you love this cover?
I did. The colors are just stunning.
And I know this is a part of a series. Can you read this on its own?
I think so.
Yes, you can read it. Yes, you can. You can read it on its own. This is great. How about you, Lori?
So I have one kidnapped child, now grown up, two protagonists, each with an online community, 3 states, Illinois, Indiana, and Wisconsin, and about 4 weeks between meeting my new neighbor living next door and her giving me the idea for this book because she was kidnapped as a child. And 5, this is where I ran out of steam. It's set among a group of people who volunteer to help bring cold case, missing persons, and unidentified cases to closure. So let's say that there are 5 of them.
That's, I mean, that's packed full of stuff. That's great. And you're the queen of the multi-layered title. Can you see this? A lucky one. What does that mean? And who is she? And I love this, the covered up face.
Which one is lucky? Yeah. Hank, what about you? What are your 5?
My 5 are a devastating childhood betrayal, an undercover reporter who's in too deep, a beautiful sailboat on the Chesapeake Bay, a rich and powerful family, and an ice pick that is not used for ice. and that is the first to lie. And that is what the cover looks like, because some of the main characters are people who live in the same apartment building and they may or may not be in conflict. So I thought this was a very sort of Mondrian cover look, and sort of modern. So again, I'm enchanted by how our stories are so different, and to sort of keep going in this. I'm looking at the and people are saying Tracy's saying can't beat a good ice pick. This is great. The thriller writer did it, Tracy Clark says. You know, to try to talk about where our books came from and how our books evolved is always so interesting too. Lori has a great story. You were talking about tell that really quickly. I know you told it in your one phrase, but tell us a little bit more about where this came from.
My neighbor the house next door was empty for a little while, and when the family moved in, it was a cute little family, and the woman over the fence one day said she was nervous about the fence being low because she thought someone might grab her daughter. And I thought, well, that's dark. I'm usually the person who thinks that way. And she said, oh, it's because I was kidnapped as a child and brought home safely within, the same afternoon. And part of the idea that really stood out to me was the kidnapped, brought back safely, but then she has this story that just, it'll stop any conversation that anyone is having near you. You have to know you were kidnapped. You were kidnapped.
Because it all seems like it's something that couldn't happen. But of course, you, Laura, you just say, tell me more. And then you go and write it all down, right? I
did say, okay, you might have just become the protagonist of my next novel. Is that we had just met, they had just moved in. Like, is that okay? And she was like, yay. And I'm like, I don't think you're going to think so, but you never know. You never know.
What about you? Where did your story come? It takes place in Alaska. How did that evolve?
Well, bizarrely, the inspiration for the series is very far away from what the series became. Other than the location, my in-laws were in Alaska for 25 years. So I had some exposure to Alaska, and I was so struck by the primitiveness of the entire state that it stayed with me forever. I've only visited a couple times, but it stayed with me. But honestly, the inspiration for the protagonist or the story or her struggles came from something very far away. She had thrown herself out of the van of the man who kidnapped her, and she had to have surgery to clear a subdural hematoma in her head. Well, and he's fine, he's great, there's no problem whatsoever, but that happened to my son, not throwing himself out of a van, but he had an accident where he had to clear a subdural hematoma. And I felt like I was so immersed into the medical world of it that I couldn't let go of it until I wrote it into a story, believe it or not. So the inspiration is very full circle and very strange, but that's where they both came from.
Wow, that is so interesting. And you just wouldn't know that just by reading your wonderful book, this intricate backstory of our own experiences. Elsa, your life has been so gorgeously, exotically complicated and surprising. And your book is sort of gorgeously exotic. Where did the idea for this cabinet come from?
My answer is so different from the one so far because it's so not really based in reality or in contemporary reality, at least. It was sort of, so my first 3 books take place in China in the early 1700s. And what I learned when I was writing it that I didn't know would happen is that when you write a book, you create these kind of ghosts that follow you around of like all the things that get squeezed out from the book, because for me they always start out so much bigger than they end up being. So I have these like ghosts of characters and ghosts of plot points. And so Cabinets of Barnaby, Maine was basically a ghost who like wouldn't leave me alone from one of my previous books. It was a character who in my first book was based on a botanist who traveled to China in 1696. He was a Scottish ship surgeon. And when he traveled there, he had all these letters from London collectors and apothecaries basically asking him to send back rare plants, pressed plants, back to London, to the homes of these collectors. And he kind of got squeezed out of the story, and I'd always wanted to go back to him and sort of follow the journey of these plants back from China to England. So that's what I did with Cabinets of Barnaby, Maine, and entered the houses of these collectors, which, you know, the more I learned about them and that community there at the time, they were these obsessive, crazy people, just like perfect. There were so many motives for them to kill each other. It became like very easy to write a murder mystery about it because they were a crazy group.
Well, if it's easy to write a murder mystery, we can talk about that, because it is not. That is so gorgeous. And I hope you'll all look at the comments in the chat as you're talking, because people are saying, ooh, I love this. Jess Montgomery is saying, I love that, ghosts squeezed out of what gets left out of the main novel. Jess Montgomery, whose book The Stills is coming out very soon. Anyway, Mariah, you have chosen New York in 1913 and A Lady's Maid as your protagonist. Where did that come from? Where did that series idea come from?
I was writing a completely different kind of book, and the first line, what would become the first line of the first book in the series, I will tell it, and I will tell it badly, just popped into my head. You wait for a character to kind of reveal themselves. And I started having an image of a woman who had sat on a secret for decades and decades and decades. And I thought, this is a woman who knows the truth about a crime of the century, only she never told anyone, and no one knew that she knew it because she was somebody nobody paid attention to. And I thought, who wouldn't you pay attention to? Servants. And because no one notices them, they're in a position to see and hear all sorts of things. So that's how Jane Prescott was born. And the books progress year by year, and now we're in 1913. And I always try and have history inform the who and why of the mystery. So the 2 big events of this are the 1913 Armory Show and sort of cutting up bodies and faces in new, different ways, and the 50th anniversary of the Emancipation Proclamation, and where is the country on the issues of race and enslavement. So the case that Jane gets involved with takes all of those themes into it.
And it was so much fun to read her seeing this exhibit of the Cubists and how aghast New York was at this junk art that had suddenly been perpetrated on the public. And quickly, the first to lie, I'm a television reporter, and I have gone undercover and in disguise. And this book came out of an undercover story that I did posing as a woman, as a wife, who went to a doctor with my husband, who was my producer. And we said that we wanted to get pregnant, and could this doctor help us? What we were trying to do in this undercover story was see whether doctors would tell us the truth about their malpractice histories, because at that point there was no easy way for the public, patients, to find out whether their doctors had had huge malpractice losses and about what. And this doctor, I said to him with a hidden camera in my button cam, filming him without him knowing that I was taping him, I asked him if he had ever had any malpractice losses, and he said no. And I said, not any at all? And he said no. And that was just not true. It was just completely a lie. So I thought, you know, the law changed as a result of our story. But I was thinking about that he had lied to me for a bad reason. He had lied to me to get me to pay him, to get us to hire him, to, you know, for selfish reasons for him. And that was bad. But I had lied too. I had lied to him when I went in undercover with the hidden camera and in disguise. I didn't say I'm Hank Phillippi Ryan from Channel 7. You know, I said I'm Sally Smith who wants to get pregnant. And that lie was okay because it was for the greater good. And I just started thinking about truth and started thinking about what people will do to get what they want, and when is a lie acceptable. And that is where the first to lie came from. And you were talking about, Mariah, you were talking about first lines. So let me let the group hear people's first lines. I'm going to start with yours, since this was your thought. You had such a great one for the first one. The first line of Death of an American Beauty is, "The Princess of Wales had a son. Beyond that, I'm not sure." What does that mean? How did you choose that line?
I always have Jane looking back at the age of 90. And it's about the stories that catch our eye and obsess us and cause us to overlook other stories. And of course, we always pay attention. This is I guess it's 1981, and Diana is holding William in her arms. But there's a story lower down on the newspaper that she will have to deal with later.
Wow, that's pretty prescient timing also, I gotta admit. And that is such a way to get into her brain, though. I mean, other than that, I can't remember.
Yeah, she's elderly, so she needs her glasses. So
yeah, lovely. And Lori, with The Lucky One, the first line of The Lucky One is, "A dead woman looked out from the laptop resting on Alice Fine's kitchen table." I mean, that's just instantly creepy. Tell about where that came, I mean, in a good way. Tell about where that came from.
I don't think that was the first line for a while. I sometimes have to go back and look at that first scene later on, once I know what the book is about. And I think I wanted to show that Alice was sort of taking this all in stride, that she's been volunteering with a group called the Doe Pages. It's based on a real website called the Doe Network, where they try to make these matches between unidentified remains and missing people. But she hasn't been doing it very long, but she's already kind of one of them. She's one of those oddballs I was mentioning earlier. She's taking it in stride, eating her cereal, you know, and looking over this profile about a dead woman. And she's going to try to bring this dead woman, you know, a closure, bring her back to her family. That's kind of the goal. But, you know, for now, she's just eating her Cheerios with a dead woman looking back at her.
I mean, that's the weird juxtaposition, isn't it? She's eating breakfast and looking at a dead person, and that's all fine. Alice Fine. And that's all fine. So very creepy and gets us
going
right.
to be fine.
Yeah. All going to be fine, like they always are. Also, let me read the first line of The Cabinets of Barnaby, Maine. I'm just having so cover envy. I love this cover. The first line is, "It has been suggested that the surface of the earth was once smooth and that beneath it was an abyss filled with water." And that's singular. I mean, you just don't read things like that. Where did that come from and why?
You read it so much better than I would have. I'm so glad you read this. Thank you. But so my intention with the first sentence was to present a historical detail in the tone of a tale. And that's kind of the tone I wanted to set for the whole book. You know, the theory that I start describing that first sentence and go on to describe that the earth was once this smooth, almost like eggshell, and that the biblical flood, instead of being rains from the outside, was a cracking of that shell and a welling of water from the inside that destroyed everything. And that's what created the surface of the earth as we know it. That was actually a theory that this guy came up with in the 1680s, and that would have been being debated in the coffee shops of London in 1703. But, you know, to me, to my reader's mind now, it sounds like they're talking about, you know, magic, and they would also have been talking about the occult and mermaids, but all in the context of science. And I was so drawn to that period in history, and I wanted to really settle into it with the first sentence of the book, and get that.
It does instantly bring up the conflict and the discussion and the sort of mental searching, exploring that people were doing at that time for things that people didn't understand.
Definitely, and also destructiveness. I just wanted to start with an image of rupture and disruption, because it's a murder mystery, and that's what ultimately it's going to be about, is rupture, destruction, death, and all the consequences of it. So I just thought it was a good big image to start with.
Yes, gorgeous, absolutely gorgeous. And another wonderful atmospheric image from Paige Shelton's Cold Wind, which is chilly enough, sort of like it is in Boston today. I lifted the curtain flap. Twilight was one of my new favorite things. An extended time here in my new neighborhood in Alaska, before and after real sunrise and sunset. And you're so taken to another place, and this sort of, you know, interstitial time that isn't a real time, which is perfect for moving over to daylight savings time. Why did you just decide to start with the time and the light in your book?
I think it was a very big portrayal of the character's healing at that particular point. She's still, this is the second book of the series, and so she's still trying to recover from the trauma that she's been through, and she's kind of now in the twilight phase of that. She's coming out of the darkness a little bit, but moving to the twilight phase. So that was at least my goal, and hopefully that kind of goes through the book. And then hopefully, you know, she gets into a little more brightness as time goes on.
I mean, it also takes us to Alaska and how different it is in Alaska. So we actively decided to say we are in Alaska, her new home. So she's a fish out of water here.
Yeah, oh, absolutely. And everything's different in Alaska. I mean, everything, the light, the landscape, everything is different.
And I know you said your grandparents lived there. Lived there?
My in-laws lived there. Mm-hmm.
And so did you go to Alaska and feel what it was like?
Yes, believe it or not, I've only been there a couple times, but the first time I went, we were fortunate enough to come upon some killer whales in I think it was Cook Inlet, which they're never supposed to go. And we got lucky to see them out there, and it's just spectacular. And it is extremely primitive. You can just be swallowed whole. You can turn a corner and be gone forever.
You better use that line. And I mean, okay. Is the sky different and the water? I mean, if seeing a killer whale, did that just seem otherworldly? It
was unreal. And in fact, when my husband and I went back to his parents' house, my in-law's house, and told them, they said, that didn't happen. There's no way. And then it was the #1 news story that night. So we were vindicated.
That's amazing. What a picture to have. And then Mariah, your research, you can't go to 1913 New York. I mean, you can see the art and you can read about the Emancipation Proclamation, and you can talk about all of the what did the women call the gala events, the portrayals, the acting, the salons. That's exactly right. You're right. How did you do the research for that wonderful time of life?
Well, there are still parts of New York that you can walk around, and it does conjure, sort of down in the Wall Street area, you can get a feel of it still. And there are some bars that are left over. But newspapers, I find, are the great help, because they can really show you how people saw the events of the day from their own perspective. And what people found important at that. I mean, also New York is obsessed with ourselves. So we've been documenting every little piece of our own history for years and years through, you know, diary entries and newspapers and magazines. It's a huge treasure trove.
I mean, sometimes in doing research, you can come across a thing that just seems like the perfect thing for your story. Did you find anything like that?
I found little odd things, like on the front page of the Times, there was, you know, dead dog buried in tiny coffin. That made the front page. And I thought, this is going in the book. I don't care. So I put it in. And
Just that weird. Go ahead.
You know, just, you know, what Teddy Roosevelt thought of the Cubists, and, you know, he had a Native American blanket, and he said this is far superior in terms of artwork. And he was probably actually right in many ways, but and the inebriates were told not to go to the show because it was too disorienting and they would pass out.
Basically, if they were already drunk and saw a nude descending the staircase, then that would be completely over the edge, right? That would be. And talk a little bit, Elsa, about your research for London in 1703 and this sort of part of society that you were exploring.
Well, two things on that. First, you know, these collectors, part of their obsessiveness was being obsessive about keeping records. So keeping these catalogs of their collections that were constantly updated and constantly changed and kept up to date. So these catalogs created by collectors of the early 1700s still exist and in, you know, digitized form. So you can go and look at these lists. So all of the strange items that appear in the book, like the rat skeleton and, you know, old bottle crusted with coral and strange galleons and amulets, were all drawn from these real historical catalogs. Also, the house is very important in the book. You know, there's a lot of the murder takes place during a tour of the collection, and there are a lot of logistics to that. And I was really lucky to be able, I guess 2 years ago now, to go to London and find a house that had been built in the time period, and basically just sit inside for like 6 hours taking notes on, you know, if you stand at this place on the landing, what can you see into this room and what can you see into that room? And can you hear an entire conversation going on in the attic, or can you just hear the voices? So to be able to create basically an architectural sketch of that house was pretty essential to making the story work.
I keep looking down like this because I'm looking at you. You know, that is, it's so beautiful to think of you sitting in that house and making it be authentic when you really wouldn't have to. You could really write whatever you wanted to write, and nobody would know if it were true. And Lori, the queen of research with, you know, these Doe networks are real. Did you immerse yourself in this?
A little bit. There's a website. They have a website. So early on, I just looked at the website and sort of shuffled the database to, you know, this way and that, searching by date, searching by state. The women and the men are separated. At one point, I was kind of looking through, you know, by state. I looked at Indiana because that's where I'm from, and I saw a face that I recognized. And it was a girl that I had gone to elementary school with, who had gone missing when we were both children. And it's not like I didn't remember that she had gone missing. I remembered. I just kind of didn't expect her to show up for some reason. She's been gone, you know, 30 years, and she's not coming back. They're pretty definitive about that, with details I won't go into. But seeing her face there gave me something to work with on the story. I borrowed that moment from my character. The research part is that I have never been the kind of volunteer that this character is, who's going to get involved with the site. Had never researched unidentified remains, or, you know, a body or a missing person. So I went back to my hometown and I researched the girl from my school. I wouldn't call her a friend, but we did know each other, and had at least one conversation on the school bus that we both rode. So I went to my hometown and
asked for all the hard records in my hometown library.
Wow, that is so touching, the whole thing. I need to tell you all that, also you might not see, Lee is saying, oh, historical fiction fans will always call out inaccuracies or anachronisms. Yeah, okay, so you better go do it. I mean, are you all worried about that? I mean, do you worry about Paige, Alaska, and Mariah, New York at your time, and Lori and Elsa, that you'll get something wrong?
I can start. I mean, I make up so much in my kind of historical fiction. You know, none of the characters are actual people from history. So there's this slight, you know, one can take more creative liberties if you go that direction. But I think mostly what I worry about is you just, if at some point a reader knows more than you do and like catches you on something where you're not the authority, then they fall out of the story and they don't enjoy it as much, and that makes me feel like I've let down the reader as a writer. So you hope that you can just know enough and learn enough to create a world that keeps every reader in it for the duration of the book. Is my take on it.
And you never know what landmines there are going to be, right? In the books, I put in a book once that someone had left a turkey sandwich on his desk, and he didn't want to eat it when he came back because he was worried the mayonnaise would go bad. And somebody emailed me and said, it would be the turkey that would go bad, not the mayonnaise. Okay, you know,
right.
my character thought it was the mayonnaise, you know, fine. And Mariah, what about you with research? I know you're careful, but how much leeway do you take?
Yeah, my mother was a fact checker, so I try very hard to get it right, but I've gotten it wrong. A woman wrote to me about a street that I mentioned in Philadelphia. It was Philadelphia, not New York. And she said, you called it X, and we've only been calling it X since the 1980s. And I thought, as someone who lives in New York and knows no one calls 6th Avenue Avenue of the Americas, I should have double checked that.
Oh, I'm sorry to bring that up. I'm sorry. I mean, those kinds of things, when everything else is gloriously wonderful and you're thinking about rats. I had one word wrong in chapter 47 of an old book. I know. We're all kind of crazy. And Alaska and Paige, what about Alaska?
Well, I try very hard to make everything up. So I base things upon different things because I mean, I'm always bound to get something wrong. And in a previous book I'd written for a previous series, it was completely made up. The town, the people, the shop, everything was completely made up. But I had some unfulfilled knowledge of calico cats. And so I still receive emails about how I got the calico cats wrong. So I just want to make as much up as I can. So I based Benedict on a town, but Benedict, Alaska is not a real place.
Oh, I put in the beginning of my books that I have taken some liberties with the geography of Boston to protect the innocent. And that means just if I get a one-way street wrong, just don't tell me that.
Right.
It's interesting though, because one of the things in my books one of the things in all of our books that we can't get wrong is the emotions of the character. And that's sort of the research that I get to do for my books. Is as a reporter, I can't tell you how I feel about a story. You know, you see my objective story on television and that's the facts and that is what it is. But you don't know, the viewer doesn't know if I'm afraid of doing the story, if what I left out, how I decided to put in, whether I like the people that I interviewed, you know, how did I come upon that story and what story did I not do in order to do that one? And that is the sort of, that sort of emotion of being a reporter that, you know, I sort of have to go undercover as a reporter as a person when I'm a reporter. So when I'm an author, I can sort of take that veil off of my emotions as a reporter, or how a reporter feels about knocking on the family of a victim's door. You know, that's gruesome and nobody likes to do that. But those kind of actions can come across as realistic. I'm allowed to say that and tell you about that. in a novel. The other, talk about what we're allowed to say. One of the things about the Mary Higgins Clark Award is there's no graphic sex, really, no graphic violence, no inappropriate language. How much do you all think about those constraints when you're writing the book? Who has a thought about that? Paige, you look like you have a thought.
Well, I don't think about it. It's always the editing, it's always going back through the editing. It's like, oh, no, that won't work. Little too much blood on that knife. So the first round through, I try not to think about it too much. I try not to do any sort of self-editing, but I also do understand why some things do need to come out. Not everything needs to be there for everyone to see in every book. There are certain specific books for that, and perhaps these aren't exactly that.
I mean, they do say whoever they is, to write the kind of book you love to read. Paige, is that what you're doing?
Absolutely, 100%. Yeah, absolutely. Love to read things with suspense, love to read quirky characters. I hope to put all of that in the books. It's, you do the best you can and hope for the best.
And yes, that is true.
Yeah.
And Mariah too, in your books, the level of sort of elegance and propriety of the time might dictate how your book is written, the sort of tone and sensibility of it. Talk a little bit about that.
Yes, I was going to say that I'm helped by having a woman from the 1910s tell the story, and there's only so much lurid detail she's going to share. But that for me is part of the fun with historical fiction, is how do you talk about violence? How do you talk about out of control emotions or sexual impulses in a way that's appropriate for that time, and yet very vivid and full of the darkness that draws us to mysteries.
Mm-hmm. And is that fun to write, to put yourself in Jane's head like that?
Oh, huge fun. Yeah. No, she's much smarter than I am, so I love living in her head.
But do you sit differently? I can imagine you sitting with very elegant posture when you're writing.
I wish. No, I'm like that.
Beating your head against the desk, right? And Elsa, you too. I mean, the way that people were and the way that people thought about what violence even meant and how raw some parts of culture, civilization were at that time. How do you balance that?
Yeah, it's a good. I think my approach is to just consistently ask myself, what is the story I'm trying to tell, and what world am I building in order to hold this mystery story, and what does that world need to contain in order to tell it? So I'm not trying to get across reality, really. It's almost sometimes feels, writing the kind of historical fiction I write, sometimes I almost feel like I might have more in common with fantasy writers or something, because you're really world building for one very specific, very small purpose, which is to tell this one story. And the mysteries that I've written just haven't required those elements in order to, as you said, to get across the emotions that are there. They can be there without those details. So I sort of haven't had to test myself yet to see if I could write them if I needed to. I hope so.
Interesting. I mean, because it is about what the story needs, and I do feel the sort of element of fantasy edges in your book, because it's so imaginative throughout and so gorgeous throughout. And then Laurie has sort of the so contemporary and so of our times, and a missing person who leads their family bereft and confused and searching is an incredibly difficult thing to write about.
Well, I mean, that's what we're here to. We're here to explore emotions that we haven't necessarily had ourselves. You were talking about, the research you do, cluing into the research, the feelings that your characters would have. And I think that we probably all have to do that. We're not living the lives that our characters are living. We haven't gone through some of the things. In my first book, there was someone who was shot and had, a long recovery. And somebody at a book club asked me, had I been shot, is that how I was able to write that character? And I'm like, well, no. But I had surgery once that wasn't great. So, you just take your own feelings and your own emotions and your own thoughts, or take your own thoughts down to the deepest, darkest place they can go, to the very ends of that thought, and see where it leads.
And also, when you're writing about someone else, it really is someone else. I mean, you're not being you writing about someone else. At least for me, I'm really channeling that person. And as I was saying to Mariah, I do sit differently if I'm writing Lacey than if I'm writing Brooke or Nora. I can see my facial expressions change when I'm writing someone. I don't like the violence. I don't like graphic violence in books. I had said to my husband once, I wonder if I could just not kill the person, but they just sort of get hurt really bad. They get hurt really badly. Then they go to the hospital, then they get better. And Jonathan says, honey, you don't write people who get hurt a little bit badly and then go to the hospital and get better mysteries. You write murder mysteries. So someone is going to have to get killed. But that's always the most difficult part for me. And as for graphic language, my books are often about reporters. And a television reporter, cannot use graphic language in real life, because if they do and they're live on television and something happens, the language synapse has been jumped. So your instant surprise reaction will be to say something that you can't say on TV. And so I get teased for when I say, oh, rats, oh gosh. And it's because I can't allow my synapses to connect with words that I can't say on TV. But I couldn't tell. I mean, that's the kind of thing that I can tell in my books. And that's one of the reasons why they are how they are, written like as a real reporter would think. It's fun to do. Oh my golly, I should have looked at the clock a lot sooner. Alex,
Golly, she says.
I know, now I'm going to hear about this from you, Lori, forever.
Golly, I can tell you that I've got the different synapse, connected.
The different synapse, okay.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so it looks like so far we have one question. We do have time for a few, so if anyone has any more, then definitely throw them in there. But we do have one from Lee, and it is, quote, a librarian question. What Google searches have you done for book research that might raise the eyebrows of a real detective?
Oh my goodness, Lee, we love you librarians. That is such a wonderful librarian question, I've got to say. And thank you all librarians for persevering through this pandemic. Like bookstores, what an impossible situation for you all. And we are so grateful for all of your, backing and resourcefulness and persistence in allowing people to still figure out a way to get books from libraries and bookstores. You see, I'm stalling here thinking of a Google. I mean, how I did Google for The First to Lie. How long does it take someone to drown in Chesapeake Bay? How to put up a spinnaker, and how would a spinnaker pole break? I also looked up the best beer in Maryland, the best local beer in Maryland, and how you could make a tire go flat without it being noticed. How about you all? Can you think of any Google searches?
I mean, I spent a lot of time on that Doe Network website, a lot of time, and it's just wall-to-wall misery. Just it's a little tough
because that is such a niche of everybody who's unhappy.
Well, it's just a sea. It's like a yearbook, and everyone is missing. Mm-hmm. Or if you go to the other side of the website, it's a yearbook, and everyone is a drawing or a mask because they were found dead, right? Their bodies. but I felt like it was important to get the story right. So most of my research was about, it's kind of like the research I was doing when I went home to research that particular missing girl was, what happens when a child goes missing. And this was, this is the 80s where this happened. So there was no Amber Alert. They thought she was a runaway. She was 12. She was not a runaway. But that's the kind of research I was doing. So missing children. I don't think anything that would get me a visit from the feds.
That you know of.
That I know of, yeah.
What about you, Paige? You must have done weather and atmosphere and environment and...
I do the weather, I do the sunrise, sunset quite a bit. I remember Googling what color would a dead frozen body be after a certain amount of years. And I can't, for some reason, I want to say it's just the normal skin tone. It doesn't have a tinge of blue or gray to it at all. So whatever the normal skin tone, that's what I remember, but I could be wrong. So I apologize if I'm remembering my Google wrong, but that might be one of the more gruesome things.
But you have to know that. I mean, you have to know that.
Right.
Do you erase your search history after you do it?
I don't.
I don't either. What about you, Mariah? Anything iffy? Are you the laudanum arsenic searches?
I do remember trying to find images of people who have been bludgeoned to death with a fireplace poker. And what would it do to the eyes? What would it do to the nose? Would it be?
I think you could just make that up, Mariah. Come on.
Somebody know.
Well, I got a volunteer. So, yeah, no, I was like, am I actually gonna look? Yeah.
Gotta look. What about you, Elsa?
Definitely none for me. It would be a very strange Fed whose priority was busting research into 18th century, like how much a wig costs or something. Nothing good.
A very strange Fed sounds like kind of a good title. That could be. John is asking in the chat, John Wachowski, hello, darling one of the best photographers ever in Chicago or anywhere else, what we're all working on. Let me ask about that. Who wants to start? Lori, I know you have something great coming.
Well, I do have something I'm excited about because I just got my AREs. Look at that beauty. Death at Greenway's out in October.
Nice.
This is when everything got canceled, what I did is I came home and I rewrote this book. So twice. This is based on a little piece of history, little known about World War II when they were evacuating children out of the Blitz. They moved about 3 million people, but 10 children were sent to Agatha Christie's holiday home in South Devon. They were there for maybe a year, a little longer. And so I used the fact, as much fact as I could find, and then wrote fiction sort of all the way around it.
Everybody's just racing to Brookline Booksmith to pre-order this book,
Hey, do that. Yeah.
No, they are. Okay. What about you?
And I got to stay at Agatha Christie's house to research it. So that, yes, it was awesome.
Just being mean. Now this is just over the top. This is cruel and unusual.
Mm-hmm.
That's, I'm going to my mailbox now, waiting for this. What about you, Paige?
I have, for one of my cozy series, a Scottish bookshop book coming out in April. And then the third book in the Alaska series, it's called Dark Night, will be out in December. So those are both turned in and done and wrapped and ready to roll.
That's so great. Thin Ice, Cold Wind, and Dark Night. That's really perfect. That's wonderful.
Thank you. Thank you.
Mariah, Elsa, how about you?
Let's see, the next Jane Prescott, Death of a Showman, comes out on April 13th. Jane gets involved in Broadway. And right now I'm working on a novel about the Lindbergh nanny, Betty Gow.
What was on Broadway at that time? Would it be 1914 then?
Yeah, 1914, Irving Berlin was around. You had Vernon and Irene Castle.
Oh, really?
And a lot of hilarious review shows. Fanny Bryce. So yeah.
Wonderful.
Other great
That's
stuff.
great. I'm not sure if they'd be wonderful these days. Isn't that interesting to think about?
Yeah.
And Elsa, what are you working on?
I'll be quick because I know we're over time, but I'm working on the next Cecily Kay and Mac and Barlow, the sequel to Barnaby Maine. They travel to Cecily's family estate where the first person they encounter is someone desperately searching for a door into fairyland, which actually came from historical research. There was a guy in the early 1700s who wrote a whole book about his search for fairyland in the sort of moors of northern England. So that's the center of the next story.
That is fabulous. And my next book is coming out in, did you see me reaching over to get it? I thought, oh wait, it's over here. I'm gonna go right over here. And this is, oh, look at this, beautiful, precious. Her Perfect Life comes out. It's a psychological standalone that comes out in September. It's about the spotlight. It's about fame and celebrity and the vulnerability of the spotlight. And how do you keep a secret if everyone knows who you are and everyone knows where you are and everyone knows where your family is? So that is Her Perfect Life. How do you keep it says on the cover, Her Perfect Life, all she has to do is keep one secret. And that's what this is about. So I'm very, very excited about that. You all, congratulations on the Mary Higgins Clark nomination. I mean, that is
Congratulations to you, Hank.
Thank you. I wish we could be there together in person with all of these many, many, many people in the chat. And no pressure, you all, but our books are for sale at Brookline Booksmith. And Alex is going to tell us about the discount. Yes. But first, thank you all. Thank you.
Thank you.
Nominees for coming, and all of you wonderful people in the audience. This has been exceptional and wonderful and quite touching, actually. So congratulations.
Wonderful to have all of you here. Thank you so much. It's such a good time to hear a bit more about all of your books. Just such an incredible lineup. So thank you all for being here tonight. And thank everyone in the audience for being here. I want to mention a couple of things. First of all, the Edgars are going to be streaming on Zoom on April 29th at 1 p.m. Eastern Time. You can find registration information on Twitter beginning in April. Mystery Writers of America is on Twitter at Edgar Awards. That's one word. So again, if you want to keep track of the Edgars, registration info will be up on Twitter at Edgar Awards starting in early April. Second of all, yes, a couple of people have asked how you can buy tonight's books. Once again, the code for that at brooklinebooksmith.com only is MHC Brookline, all one word. That's good until March 20th on any of the featured books for 10% off of those titles. So again, thank you so much. This is a great event. Really good to see and hear all of you. And I hope everyone has a wonderful night.
Thank you, Alex.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.